Servus Männer, it's Red Pill Germany again. Today I want to talk about a really obvious artifact in China bug data that is used by politicians and by the media in order to distort reality and to scare the public. In my last video I told you that they have an interest to keep the numbers up. But how did the numbers actually get that high in the first place? Part of that strategy was to heavily modulate the signal. You saw that on the thumbnail, and whenever I show data of mortalities or of daily new infection numbers, you always see this weekly modulation with a 7-day period where in some days there are a lot of occurrences and in some other days, mostly the weekend, there is almost nothing. This is an administrative artifact that is not real, but it is used by the media and by politicians so that they can report higher numbers than the actual true numbers. And this difference is, well, from a PR or a psychological perspective, from a propagandistic point of view, this difference is significant. I have mentioned this effect a couple of times in previous videos, but I never made a dedicated video about it, and I thought about my previous presentations and I thought maybe this very important point and what it actually tells us about our system has not come across that clearly. I should really be more clear about that. So in today's video, I want to describe in detail what this effect is and why they don't get rid of it, and then show you an example of how the true numbers would actually look like. And you can easily look that up on databases online, but it is never really mentioned in newspaper articles. Okay, before we get into that, I want to thank all my supporters and all my subscribers. Like, share and subscribe, especially on alternative video platforms such as BitChute and Odyssey. Links are in the descriptions down below. If you want to, you can support me directly via PayPal, or you can use Patreon or Subscribestar. Alright, so the effect that I'm talking about is, as I said in the beginning, the modulation on all these China bug numbers, on all the signals that we see on databases. For example, if you take new infections per day, you see in Germany a highly modulated signal. On this graph you see, for example, modulation depth of up to 66%, which means that if the peak value is 100%, then the lowest value at the bottom of the modulation on these days where there are not that many cases is just 33%. And that is of course a huge modulation depth. This is not only true in Germany, this is true in many other countries. In the United States, for example, you see the same modulation. For daily infection numbers in the US, the modulation depth is not quite as deep, but for the fatalities each day, the modulation is also very pronounced in the United States. And in Germany, the modulation depth for the daily death count with or from whatever, right, for these official death numbers is absolutely huge. It is on the order of 80%. A peak value that I just by looking at it saw is 85%. That is absolutely huge. That means this signal, if you report about the peak values, which is what the media is doing, is absolutely fake, it's false, it's manipulated, it's distorted. You have an artifact. This is what we call an artifact. It means you try to measure something, but your measurement instrument is not perfect. That means it measures kind of what you want to measure, but you have additional effects from the measurement device that are superimposed on it. And here in our case, it is administrative in nature. That means the news of any new infections or any deaths just takes a while to be processed by our administration. And there is a federal office, the Robert Koch Institute. It's a government office that compounds these numbers and that publishes these national statistics then. Now, I have no idea why they don't fix the problem, why they don't just say, okay, this data came in on Saturday, nobody was in the office on Saturday, so when we enter it into our system on Monday morning, we enter it in the Saturday tab and not in the Monday tab. I have no idea why they don't easily fix that, but that is not the actual problem. We can all see that this modulation is not real. A disease or a virus doesn't know a calendar. They don't know what day it is. It's not like you cannot die on a Sunday. You have to wait until Monday morning because otherwise it's just wrong. So whatever the true curve is, whatever the reality that they try to measure is under this heavily distorted curve, it should be a smooth, continuous line. And you can just create one that is maybe not the actual truth, but it is closer to the truth than the modulated signal, and that is use a moving 7-day average to smooth the curve. And if you go to Worldometers, where I took these graphics from, this is exactly what they offer. You can click this little check mark and then it creates a 7-day moving average. And that is maybe not the real signal, but as I said, better than the modulated one. And there we can see that even though around Christmas time or around the end of the year, German media had huge headlines like, oh, over 1,000 victims every day now, or 30,000 new cases every day, when in truth, we just had like maybe 800 victims and 20,000 new cases. But that doesn't sound as spectacular. And especially the death toll. Let me remind you, a 4-digit number and the number 1,000 creates psychologically much more fear in people's heads than if you say, well, actually it's 812 or something like that. And it was very obvious that the journalists were only publishing those peak numbers. And in the articles, they never said that actually on the weekends it's much less and it's a modulation and technically we're not supposed to. No. And they didn't talk of any weekly averages either. Only those peak numbers, they were reported. And that is what was repeated over and over by politicians and by the media. And there is another very interesting thing I noticed, and that is if you take the first wave from spring 2020, you see that the modulation depth is much smaller, both for the daily new cases and for the mortalities. So did our administrative process become worse, or is it overwhelmed with the higher level of new numbers every day? Or maybe there is another reason why they cranked up this modulation depth in the fall, huh? Of course, you can say now that technically it doesn't make a big difference for any practical purposes if it's 800 or 1,200, but psychologically, once again, it is a big difference, and this is exactly why they are doing this. And also these people from the Robert Koch Institute, those government employees, or any scientist or any medical expert for that matter, they could have said in an interview, for example, hey, we're seeing that our data is not reported on accurately. These are modulated data sets. This is not the truth. You cannot just pick the top value so that the number for your newspaper piece becomes more sensational. Nobody said that. I have not heard so far that anybody has ever criticized this common technique or this standard practice of only reporting these peak numbers that are somewhere during the week or on Mondays or Fridays or something like that. So imagine this. Imagine there was a book called Data Manipulation 101. And I don't know if there is such a book. Maybe I should write it. There should be a book like that. But this technique would not be in chapter 5 or chapter 8. No, it would be in the introduction part. And actually, it would be somewhat of a footnote in the introduction part where it would say, if it was a good book, it would say, hey, if you want to doctor your data, if you want to manipulate the public, you shouldn't do it this way. It is way too obvious. You should be smarter about it. You should be more subtle. You should have some plausible deniability. Don't do that. That's way too rough, way too coarse, and it's just nonsense. And that should be a footnote in the introduction in a hypothetical book, Data Manipulation 101. That's how I see it, at least. This is really clumsy. It's really stupid. If anybody in an undergrad course or even in high school did that, he should get a failing grade or be thrown out of the institute. But this just goes to show that the media and our glorious leaders, they are taking every little opportunity, every little thing they can do in order to make this seem more dangerous and more drastic than it actually is. Just to put things into perspective once again, I mean, sure, there is some noise on the true signal also. There is shot noise, of course, and other sources of noise. But I think it is safe to say that on no single day, Germany had more than 1,000 victims. That is absolutely only due to this modulation artifact. The true signal never went near that. It scratched the 900 mark or slightly went over the 900 mark. That is this moving 7-day average. And these modulations, this comb structure that we see here is not real. It's entirely an artifact of the data entry process. All right, enjoy your Sunday. Servus, Kameraden.